looks like we have a little separation going into week 10 of the high school football season in conference play. And who are the pretenders and who are the contenders? This is Richard Walker, sports editor for the Shelby Star and Gaston Gazette. I'm Joe Hughes, sports reporter here at the Gaston Gazette, and we're looking forward to a big week 10 of high school football. And after the past 2 weeks of keynote contests, big ones that really would shape up everything and how this season could play out, it kind of lightens up just a little bit this week.
As far as the superpower matchups, I don't know that it lightens up if you ask these coaches, because they're fearful of the quote-unquote letdown that inevitably occurs after big either rivalry games or big matchups based on records in the league.
Yeah.
And we've got some of that, and it's fascinating to see how these league standings are shaken down. Obviously, Hunter Huss appears to, the race is theirs in the Big South, and they control their own fate. I mean, obviously every team does control their own fate when the year starts, but now Huss has created some separation between the two teams that we all thought would give them some fits, and that was Crest and Kings Mountain, which they've won in the last 2 weeks. So Hunter Huss looks to be in a position, but you know, these next 3 games are not going to be easy for them. There's challenges involved in that, and we'll see how they navigate finally being where they've tried so hard to get to for many, many years. And again, building on the best start since 1976 in the history of the school. And you know, and it's interesting because I've been around for a long, long time with Hunter Huss, and they've had a very good football team. We're a little bit uncharted territory with them, but certainly Huss is looking good in their league. You know, in the Southwestern 2A, Shelby and South Point now looking across the way at each other like it happened last year. We'll see if they can maintain. Shelby has East Rutherford to deal with coming
next
up
week.
Next week. South Fork has really been an opposite year. Bandy's and North Lincoln are unbeaten. They play the last game of the year. Will be interesting to see if they can get there both unbeaten.
Bandy's
Fascinating.
has West Lincoln this week.
We talked a lot about Clover. That Region 3, 5A looked to be there for the taking. Clover not going to win this year. Now it's a matter of can they salvage a strong season. And then Southern Piedmont 1A, Bessemer City goes to Thomas Jefferson this week, and that's going to tell the tale, at least in the short term, of that league. Obviously, Thomas Jefferson has to play Mountain Island Charter, so there's some really competitive games coming up in both of those leagues moving forward.
Definitely. And of course, the big one last week, Huss 14-0 over Crest, and that was a slugfest. It was fun to watch, but it was also brutal to watch at times because of how hard those two teams were really hitting each other.
Sounded like it played the way Crest needed it to play, and Huss was just better at playing that style of football than was Crest last Friday.
Yeah, and just as impressive was South Point.
Yeah.
They went to East Rutherford, was down 17-7 in the second half.
Came from behind. Yeah.
Came from behind, scored. I think they outscored them 28-7 down the stretch, and really took that game over. So they really showed a little bit of everything. I seen Jones running hard. Ray Greer catching a big touchdown pass. He actually caught it between 2 guys and broke the tackle. They're really in great position to take that league, especially with South Point, not South Point, but Shelby and East Rutherford playing next week. One of those 2 teams is going to knock the other out of the conference race in some
Well, but it could set up a 3-way tie possibility.
Yeah.
Should East Rutherford beat Shelby, then Shelby would be playing for a chance to be a 3-way tie with South Point win that last game. Certainly makes for an interesting race in that Southwestern 2A, and we kind of saw that. We've seen this coming.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't know that we saw this coming necessarily with South Point being able to come from behind from such a margin, because East Rutherford, the unbeaten team, who had they played? We know South Point had been tested. South Point still has been tested, and maybe that was the difference in that contest.
Exactly. Speaking of tests, let's say this is kind of a final exam week for Stuart Cramer and Ashbrook.
Yes.
Ashbrook coming off of consecutive losses. Of course, it was to teams like Crest and Kings Mountain. Stuart Cramer, on the other hand, comes in with 2 wins, a last second win over Burns, and then last week, of course, taking care of business at North Gaston.
You got 2 teams that took their lumps, literally and figuratively. Both teams suffered some injuries in those contests. It appears that Cramer has come through a little healthier, although they took some dings. But Ashbrook at home has a chance to kind of be that 4th place team. I mean, it's a fascinating game. We picked out our game of the week because it's the most competitive matchup that we have this week, and I'm curious to see what does happen in that game.
And the team that wins probably feels a whole lot better about themselves moving forward, particularly the postseason play.
Yes.
Of course, Kings Mountain and Burns should be fun as well.
Yeah.
I'm very eager to see that.
It's a real fascinating historical matchup. Burns leads at 26-23. Kings Mountain won the first 6 matchups between them, but Burns has had a 5-year streak from 90 to 94, a 6-year streak from 02 to 07. So Burns and Kings Mountain, it shows you just how good Cleveland County football has been, that this rivalry kind of doesn't get the traction of, say, Crest Shelby, Shelby Kings Mountain, and even Crest Burns, but it has been as determined and exciting and competitive a rivalry as there is over there. And this year, the stakes are really high for Burns, because I think Burns probably would put themselves in a real good playoff positioning if they win this game. And Kings Mountain, like I said, looking to try to be the second place team and have good seeding going into the playoffs, because their losses would be now to Shelby and Huss, which is, those teams are going to rank high in the Max Preps rankings and the metrics that they're going to use for the state playoff matchups. But Burns, I saw them play against Ashbrook and was really had a high regard for their offensive firepower. They've done nothing to diminish that. They came back an unbelievable rally against Forest View last week to win that game. It shapes up to be a real fascinating game over at Ron Green Stadium in Burns.
Burns has had 500 yards or more of total offense in both of the past 2 games. Juan Pryor has 550 yards of rushing yards and 6 touchdowns in the past 2. He's really come on, and I kind of look at him as possibly the best pound-for-pound player in the Tri-County area.
An argument can be made for that. Well, I'll put it this way. He has been the most productive for his team. I think that statement's hard to argue against. I mean, only Elijah Burris at Mount Island Charter could kind of compare with his numbers this year. It has been an unbelievable season for Kawan Pryor at Everett Burns.
Also in Big South 3A, you have North Gaston and Crest and Forest View at Huss.
Two tough games for the road teams in those.
Exactly.
I mean, good luck, but I mean, like I said earlier, Crest and Huss, there has to be a little bit of a letdown. But I would think for Huss, you got a rival in Forest View coming in. Crest, I believe it's homecoming over there. They play a beat-up North Gaston team. That really showed a lot of offensive firepower early, but the injuries have really taken their toll on the Wildcats.
Right. And we already kind of said something about this game, West Lincoln and Bandy's.
Yes.
It's really a measuring stick game for them.
Yes. They've been playing since 1962, West Lincoln's first year. Bandy's has had the better of it, 35-12 with 1 tie. But this has been a special year for West Lincoln. You talk about letdown. They don't often beat Lincoln. They won at Lincoln. How do they deal with Bandy's and how do they deal with expectations? I mean, because now there's some expectations at West Lincoln. And, they're in a position to where if they can run the table and beat Bandy's, they've got a chance at a 3-way tie, because then maybe they can let North Lincoln Bandy's do their work for them against North Lincoln later in the year in their last game.
Exactly. And then Bessemer City and Thomas Jefferson Classical. Those 2 have really been the Titans of Southern Piedmont 1A. And now, just as probably as most of us expected, they come into this game undefeated, but they got there in different ways. Bessemer City leading on a hard-hitting defense. Yep. Thomas Jefferson on a high-scoring offense. One of those has to give.
I agree. And Bessemer City, losing, granted, a rivalry game, a non-conference rivalry game to Cherryville, for where they've come in the first year, it's been remarkable what Larry Boone and his staff have done with that team.
Yeah.
And they've got a chance to really put a stranglehold on that league title if they can win at Thomas Jefferson. I think Thomas Jefferson's a really strong team. Nomi McMullins is one of the best individual talents in the area.
Yeah.
And, again, Bessemer City's got their chance. I think Thomas Jefferson will be a hard challenge for them, but, we thought Mount Island Charter was going to beat Bessemer City too, and they shut them out. So, or basically shut them down and shut them out.
I really think that Bessemer City's going to have to show a little bit more on offense. It's one of those. It's one of those games.
They got to manage the game.
Yes.
And keep. And there's an element of the offense. Just play keep away. Keep Thomas Jefferson off the field.
3 yards.
Because I think if you get into the 20s, the higher the score gets in that game, the harder it will be for Bessemer City.
I agree. You've already said you're going to be at Cherryville and Highland Tech this coming week. Porry's Gaston, they have to go to Shelby, and Shelby's really rolling.
Yes.
Maiden at East Lincoln. East Lincoln trying to rebound after consecutive losses. Lincolnton at Lake Norman Charter. Both of those teams really struggling in South Fork 2A. Mountain Island Charter at Pine Lake Prep. Mount Island Charter, I talked to Coach Washington last week. He said at that Bessemer City game, he thought his players really didn't respect Bessemer City. And that might have been the game that really tightened them up and got them right back on the right track and really respecting their opponents, because they have also been rolling since that loss. Newton Conover at North Lincoln. For North Lincoln, I guess that's a sort of like West Lincoln at Bandy's. This is a
well. And the irony there is Nick Basil, the North Lincoln coach, who's kind of been at the top of this turnaround that nobody saw coming out of the Knights, was a longtime coach at Newton Conover. So it's a big kind of semi-homecoming game for him. And the Newton Conover coach, Stephen Pack, was at North Lincoln last year. So there's a lot of fascinating subplots and storylines to that game.
Yeah, and I think North Lincoln really learned you have to respect every opponent last week, even though you are heavily favored regardless. Yes. And then finally, RS Central at South Point. As we said, sort of like Shelby, South Point is rolling, and they're really like a fine-oiled machine right now, and really are clicking on all cylinders.
That rivalry, if you include Beaumont High, dates to 1952. South Point 27-21 with 2 ties. So it's not the blowout series that you'd maybe expect given the current state of both programs. I'm not beginning to say that RS Central is going to come in there and shock them, but RS Central has had some success against South Point historically. Don't know that that'll continue on Friday night.
Right. Any final thoughts on this coming week, or things that you might expect from it?
Well, it's like I said, it's interesting to see as teams navigate the big games, that they avoid the letdown. It's a long season, and as we've seen, particularly, really in all the conferences we have, when you start thinking you figured it out, something happens. It's a little unexpected, or somebody shows a resiliency that maybe you didn't foresee. And I think it's fascinating to see here with 3 weeks to go in the regular season how that plays out, because you know you get coaches like what you said with Coach Washington from Mount Island Charter. If you don't respect your opponents and they come in with a mojo, they can come in and knock you off your pedestal. And I think a lot of our teams could be in for a rude awakening if they don't continue to get better. And let's be clear, the way the playoffs are structured is a 5-week chase, and who's rewarded annually? The teams that are playing the best at this time of year. And that's where these coaches with those high aspirations are thinking. I mean, as good as Huss's year has been, if they lost in the first or second round of the playoffs, it would feel a little bit of a damper given how good it's been. And those coaches and those players know that because they've been down this road a little bit the last couple of years. I'm interested to see how it plays out with some of these teams.
As we always say, we'll see you Friday night. Richard Walker, Joe Hughes, you have a good one.